Grad school, along with many other academic and professional spaces, wasn't built for first gen and BIPOC folks like us. And yet, here you are, navigating it all, often without the adequate support you deserve. That's why I created Office Hours with me, Doctora Yvette, a budget friendly, high impact coaching and consulting space designed specifically for first gen, BIPOC, and or neurodivergent grad students, postdocs, and early career professionals. It's a 50-minute small group drop-in session where you can ask me anything about productivity, imposter phenomenon, burnout, setting boundaries, grad school apps, funding and financial literacy, career development, and more. You can even stop by and just have me chat it up with you about a recent podcast episode if that works for you. You'll receive strategies and a supportive space to figure things out together. Spots are capped at 8 participants to keep it intimate and interactive and to make sure I can answer everyone's questions. Sessions happen twice a month for a limited time. To be honest, I'm not sure how long I'll keep this offer available. So sign up now at the link in the show notes and let's get you the support that you deserve. Applying to grad school can sometimes feel like you're trying to solve a puzzle with 1,000 missing pieces, and you don't even know if you have all the pieces for this puzzle, and you're not really sure where to start. What actually matters? How do you make sure that your application is strong? How do you make yourself stand out? When do you get started? In this episode, I'm going to break it all down for you from starting to plan for it to the final submission so that you can approach your grad school application season with confidence and strategy. So whether you're just getting started on thinking about grad school applications or you're in the thick of it, you know you're going to be applying either right now or this year, this episode will serve as a guide for you to get all the questions answered that you've had and to hopefully feel less stress and feel more confident about the process. Welcome to the award-winning Grad School Femtoring Podcast, the place for first-gen BIPOCs to listen in on inclusive grad school stories and learn about personal development and productivity tips. This is Doctora Yvette Martinez-Vu, a certified coach, consultant, and author, and I will be serving as your femtor, providing you with insider knowledge to help you reach your personal and professional goals. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. This is your host, Doctora Yvette. For those that are new here, I am a grad school and productivity coach, consultant, author, and speaker. I've been supporting people in applying to graduate school since 2010, so we're going on 15 years now. And even though I've been doing this for a while, every year I get a similar variation of the same questions over and over and over again. And you know what? I can understand, even though there's a lot of information online, you're probably curious and wondering, where can I get information that's reliable? Is this information up to date? And that's why even though I have a plethora of information on grad school admissions in my podcast, then you can check out the first 10 episodes to help you apply to grad school. Even today, a lot of that information is still applicable. I get that you're probably wanting to hear my thoughts today on how I would support others in approaching the grad school admissions process, even if they're not my current clients, even if they're not current folks that I support with through my workshops, through my coaching, and through my consulting. So this is a really big, jam-packed episode. Let's get straight to it. So what am I going to be covering today? I'm going to be covering questions related to your application timeline and how to plan for success. I'm going to be covering how to find your perfect or ideal program. So how do you find good programs? I am going to be talking about the application materials themselves and how to approach them. I'm also going to talk about how to secure strong recommendation letters. I'm going to talk about my thoughts on funding your graduate education today. And then I'll also cover a little bit about life in grad school, what to expect, how to prepare for potential challenges that might come up. And I'm going to go through them fairly quickly. I don't have a lot of time on the podcast, but just know if you're one of my listeners, this episode is for you if you are a student who's thinking of applying to grad school. This episode is for you if you know for sure that you are going to be applying to graduate school this year or next year. This episode is for you if you are someone who supports individuals who are applying to graduate school. So if you are a program director or staff member who supports students who are thinking of applying to graduate school, this episode is also for you, so you can hear my insights, and you can also send this episode to your students if they're asking you a lot of the same questions. Trust me, it'll help save you some time. I've done this in the past where people ask me the same questions and I send them an episode that answers most, if not all, of their questions. And you can even use it as a starting point to initiate some discussions with the folks coming to you for advice. So starting with the application timeline, I recently received this question. Along with a lot of the other topics, I received questions about them because in the month of April, I have 3 speaking engagements. All of them are related to grad school admissions. 2 of them are workshops, and 1 of them is a keynote. And so for the workshops, I usually encourage the folks who hire me to reach out to their students and survey them and ask them what their most pressing questions are. Why do I do this? Because I want to make sure that I tailor my material to make sure I actually answer their questions. And so again, the first question that popped up was a question about the timeline. Not everybody who applies to grad school understands what they need to do when. And because of that, they might feel like they're already behind, or the opposite, they might think they have more time than they actually have. So what do you do when? If you know you are going to be applying to graduate school a year from now, what can you do now? You can start looking into some research programs, get involved in research through summer programs or through taking a research class, or through applying for a research fellowship. The more experience you can gain, the better, especially if you're interested in PhD programs. If you're interested in more applied programs, master's programs, you want to take a look at some internships to help you gain some experience in the field. If you are looking into med school, of course, you want to make sure you have some clinical experience, and that can include volunteer work at hospitals, etc. So make sure that you are acquiring experience, and you can even start to look at some sample programs and see if they require you to take any standardized test. And if you do have to take a standardized test, like the graduate record exam or the MCAT, you'll want to also start to set aside time for preparing and studying for these tests. The other thing you can do is start to keep a list of potential program requirements. You can take a look at this early, only because every once in a while there might be some requirements that require some planning on your end. So I'm thinking here, for example, many years ago, there was a student who was really interested in pursuing a PhD in economics, and his top choice program required that he take a certain level of math courses in advance. If he hadn't known that early on, it would have been too late for him to apply to that program when he wanted to, because he wouldn't have completed that series of math courses that were required for that program. And in other cases, sometimes students have a lower GPA and there's a strict GPA requirement. I see this a lot among STEM fields where students will try to apply to a graduate program and the GPA requirement is a minimum of a 3.0 and they're at a 2.9. So if you know this in advance, you can work towards taking classes and really focusing on your studies so that you can get a bump in your GPA and be eligible to apply for these programs. Now, once we get closer to 6 months before your first application deadline, this is when you really want to start thinking about okay, so what are the application materials? And who are the professors that I've developed relationships with who can write my recommendation letters? And who are the people in the programs I'm interested in applying to that maybe I can reach out to let them know that I'm interested in applying, to ask them if they're accepting students this year? Are there graduate students at those programs that I can talk to ask them what life is like there? So all these things you can do 6 months in advance. Let's say, for example, you're applying to PhD programs. Most PhD program deadlines are in December. That means in the summer is a good time to reach out to faculty from the programs you're interested in to see if they would be open to having a conversation with you. Sometimes they will respond. Sometimes they're too busy and they won't respond, but it's still good to make that effort and to try to get as much information on the programs as possible before you apply. Now, in terms of the formal request for recommendation letters and when to do that, I know that people have different recommendations for this. I say, anywhere from 1 to 3 and even 6 months in advance is okay. Some people want a heads up in the summer so that they know what's coming up for them in the fall when they're writing your letters. Some people, if you give them a 3 months notice is okay. Even 1 month is usually okay. But just keep in mind, some professors, by a month before the deadline, maybe they committed to writing other letters and they might say no to you just because they weren't able to plan for it in advance. So the sooner you ask for your letters of rec, the better. And yeah, you want to also be writing your application materials, your essays. If you are in a humanities or social science field, you may be asked for a writing sample. And if so, you'll want to be working on that months in advance. Ideally, again, 3 to 6 months in advance is a good time to do this. And then once you get closer to a few weeks out, I always recommend to submit your application materials early, a week or even a few days early, just to make sure that you don't run into any issues with the timing and getting locked out of a portal. So those are some of my recommendations in terms of timeline, when to get started, what comes up after you submit. So I mentioned that PhD programs, those deadlines are in December. For master's programs, those deadlines, they vary widely, but they can start as early as January and go into February, March, even April. And sometimes there's master's programs with rolling deadlines, and so they may have deadlines as late as May and even June. So this is why it's good to know. That way you can have this idea in mind. Oh, I'm applying to PhD programs. My deadlines are going to be in December. Oh, I'm applying to master's programs. I have a little bit more time. My deadlines will be coming up January, February, March, the following year. And again, the last thing I want to say about the timeline is that expect to hear back within 2 to 3 months of when you submit. Some programs may have interviews. Many programs will invite you to an open house or a campus visit, especially if you've either been shortlisted or you have been admitted to the program. And after that, once you get the official acceptance letter, you may also get an award letter where they let you know what funding they're offering to you, if they are offering you any funding. And after that, you will have some time to make a decision. And for many programs, the final deadline to submit your decision, to give them your statement of intent to register, your SIR, that's usually around tax season. So it's usually due in mid-April is when they want you to make your final decision. So just know, if you are applying to graduate programs, most applicants will know by April what their final decision will be and where they will be going to. Now, I'm going to transition to talking about finding the right program for you. This comes up so often, and I talk about this a lot in my workshops, that most students, when they don't have any previous exposure to grad school preparation and advice and the strategy behind it, They think I'm just going to apply to the top programs in my field. So I'm going to Google top programs in whatever discipline they're in, and then pull that list and apply to the top 6, 8, 10 programs that show up. And this is not the best strategy. They think that that's good enough. They add them to their list, they take note of the deadlines, and that's it. But they're missing a crucial step in the process. If you're going to take this strategy, at the very least, take a look at every single website, take a look at all of the faculty that they have, and make sure that there's not just one, but at least 2 professors doing work that you're interested in. You want to make sure there's people there doing the work you want to do, because if there isn't anyone there, why apply? Why bother? You can't make a case for yourself. Odds are they're probably not going to want to admit you because they're not going to see how you make sense in their program. And so at the very least, do that. If you want to come in with a better strategy for finding the right program, make sure you ask around. You want to ask your professors. You want to ask any graduate students that you know in the field. You can also take a look at your research and which scholars keep coming up, and then take a look at where they got their PhD, and also take a look at where they are currently employed at now, and that'll give you some more options. The other thing to keep in mind is that it's not just about finding the right people. Yes, you can find the right people with the right research, but even the people with the right topics might not be the right mentors for you, or they might be in a program that doesn't have quite everything that you need. Maybe it's a program in the middle of nowhere, and you definitely don't want to move to the middle of nowhere. So you want to start reflecting and thinking through, what are my non-negotiables? Is location, a specific region, a specific state, is that one of your non-negotiable? Is having access to subsidized student housing one of your non-negotiables? Is knowing that you're part of a program with a really great climate that is a program that promotes diversity or that promotes inclusion, if that's one of your priorities, then you want to make sure you're on the lookout for that. Think about that for yourself. What are the things I absolutely need in a program? Maybe you're someone who absolutely needs to be in an interdisciplinary program. That was one of my non-negotiables for sure. I didn't want to be in a traditional discipline. I didn't want to do conventional research. And so that was something that I looked for. I recall when I was an undergrad, even then I didn't know all of this, but I at least knew that. So take a look at finding the right people and then determining your non-negotiables, and look at the websites and talk to people. And that's how you come up with your list of your top choice or ideal programs. Now let's talk about the actual application materials. What are the application materials that you need? Typically, for most graduate programs, you are asked to submit 1 to 2 application essays. One of them is a statement of purpose. Another one is a personal statement. In years past, you might have been asked for a diversity statement, and I know those are not as common anymore, thanks to the current administration. Unfortunately, that's not really the case, but you might still see a few supplemental questions that they might ask that might nod to that. But for the most part, you're going to be asked to write either a statement of purpose or a personal statement, or both. You'll be asked to submit a copy of a resume or a CV. And a CV is more of an academic version of a resume, and it's longer. It includes a lot more information than what a resume includes. So you want to keep track of what types of essays are they asking for and how long do they have to be. Usually their statements are about 2 pages, single or double spaced, but double check. You want to take a look at what kind of document do they want? Do they want a resume or a CV, a curriculum vitae? And then you want to draft those documents as well. You want to also keep track of, do they want me to take standardized tests? And if so, then you want to know when to submit your scores. Ideally, you want to submit those scores a month in advance at least. I also recommend doing that for submitting transcripts if they ask for official transcripts. Although that's more rare nowadays, most of the time they ask you for unofficial transcripts that you can download yourself, and that's usually fine. And then aside from that, I mentioned earlier, you might be asked for a writing statement if you're applying to PhD programs in humanities fields or social science fields. And that's about it. The essays, the other thing I didn't mention are your letters of rec. So you want to keep track of how many letters of rec are they asking for. Typically, it's 3. Sometimes they ask for 2, but usually they ask for 3. And also you want to keep an eye out for who can write those recommendation letters. It's usually professors, but if you're applying to more applied programs or master's programs and professional programs, they may also accept recommendation letters from former supervisors. So what do you do to make sure that you craft standout application materials? With the statement of purpose, you want to make sure that you give them more insights on who you are, what motivated you to study or pursue the discipline that you're interested in. You want to talk about your previous experiences. That might be research experiences, that might be internship and work experience, that might be relevant coursework. But you want to show that you have the skills, you want to show that you have the experiences, and you want to show that you have quantifiable outcomes. And that can mean that you have presented your research, that you have created a poster. Maybe you've published your work, although that's not required, but sometimes undergrads publish their work, or anything else that conveys that you have done something notable. Maybe you wrote a 30-page thesis. You want to mention that. So that's what you want to share in your statement of purpose, more about who you are, previous experience, then you transition into what you would like to study in graduate school, along with what about this program stands out to you. Is it their coursework? Is it their professors? And then name the professors, name the 2 individuals you'd like to work with. And then anything else about the program or about the campus or even the greater community that attracts you to this program. And then you want to share more about your long-term goals and how this program is going to help you to reach those long-term goals. For the personal statement, I want to say that the personal statement is usually harder to write than the statement of purpose because it's not as formulaic. But either way, even though it's not as formulaic, there's a lot that you can do with the personal statement. So for example, in the personal statement, you can go more in depth in sharing your personal experiences that have shaped who you are. You can also share experiences that you haven't previously had a chance to talk about that maybe aren't directly related to your discipline, but still impacted you and still shaped your interests. So always tying it back to, in both statements, how this has shaped you into developing the interests that you're interested in or wanting to pursue this degree and a career in this discipline. With the personal statement too, there are certain traits that you can highlight. So it's really nice to be able to have some sort of theme. You can talk about the ways that you have overcome challenges. You can talk about how you have been resilient. If you're someone who is curious, you want to showcase that. You can also showcase leadership skills. This is where work experience or volunteer experience might come up. And this is where you get to be more reflective about who you are, how you got to where you are today, and how it all, you're crafting this narrative that it has all led to this moment of you applying to this program. The other great thing about the personal statement is that you can use it as a space to address any application gaps that you're worried about. So if you have in your transcripts a semester that you didn't do so well, you can justify that. You can say, during that semester, this is what happened, this is what came up for me, this is how I dealt with it, and this is how I've overcome it. And as you can see, after that, I did a lot better in my GPA or something like that. You can really showcase what happened, justify what came up and what you've done to actively overcome that obstacle or that hurdle. I think that's all I have to say about the personal statement for now. And then with the resume, with the CV, there's a lot of sample templates that you can find online. So just keep an eye out on that, or ask other people you know, maybe even professors, if they have a template or a sample that they wouldn't mind sharing with you. So that way you know how to format it. But usually these documents, they're not as hard to draft as the essays. And if you're curious, like how long does a resume need to be? How long does a CV need to be? Resumes are fine if they're 1 page each. And then CVs, usually when I see undergrad CVs, they're no more than 2 pages each. So you don't have to have a lot of experience, but definitely for graduate programs, you want to have an education section. You want to have a research experience or even relevant experience section. If you haven't done the research, but you're working on more applied work, you can have your relevant experience section. You can also have work experience. You can have volunteer experience or leadership experiences. You can have a skills section. There's a lot of different things that you can showcase. If you have TA'd or been a tutor, you can include a teaching experience section. If you've presented your work, you can have a research presentation section as well. I actually have a blog post and a separate podcast episode on how to write a CV for grad school applications that you can check out. That blog post is probably one of my top blog posts of all time. Like, it just gets a lot of views, and I know it's because folks need this kind of added support of how to write it. So if you still have questions about it, make sure to check out that blog post, and I can link it in today's show notes to make it easier for you. Hi, Femties. I'm gently interrupting the show to let you know that you can be a sponsor for the Grad School Femtoring Podcast. Whether you're a small business owner, a book author, or part of an educational startup looking to reach a loyal audience, this is your chance to showcase your work. My listeners are first-gen BIPOC college students, grad students, and early career professionals who value mentorship, education, and empowerment. If it sounds like a fit, head to the show notes to learn more about sponsoring an episode. All right, so now I'm going to transition to talking about recommendation letters. And remember, everything that I share here, I go in more depth in my workshops and in my one-on-one services. So again, if you're listening and you're someone who books people for events, please reach out to me because I have a ton of resources. I'm here to serve you. I'm here to tailor my work, customize, make sure that your students and your audience members get the most value out of what they need based on their questions, their concerns. And same thing, if you're an individual and you need added support, check out my one-on-one consulting services, especially my grad admissions consulting services. I can help you with your application materials. And keep in mind, a lot of people that work with me, they are able to get funding through professional development funds, either through their job or also through their program if they are current graduate students. So for example, if they're a master's student applying to PhD programs, or if they are working professionals, then some folks get funding for that. So keep an eye out so that you can continue to get the support you need and you can get additional help on all of what I'm talking about. So again, going back to how do you secure strong recommendation letters? If you know that you're not applying this year, that you're going to apply next year, or even you're going to take some time off and you'll apply in the future, make sure that you are intentional about nurturing relationships with professors because they are the ones writing your recommendation letters. How do you do this? By sending occasional emails, updating them on what you've been up to, by having in-person or virtual calls with them over coffee or tea just to make sure that they remember who you are. And ideally, your recommenders are people who are professors in your discipline. And ideally, they are tenured professors or senior professors in your discipline. Sometimes people will get recommenders who are graduate students who get their letters signed off by a professor. I know that's not always ideal. Sometimes applicants will get letters from an old professor who has been their longtime mentor at a community college, or a professor who is an adjunct professor, so they're part-time temporary professors, but they developed a good relationship with them. Those are not ideal, but it's still better to have a strong letter from someone who knows you well than a very weak letter from a top professor who doesn't know you at all. So make sure you think about who your recommenders will be. Think about who could be a backup option in case your ideal recommenders aren't available to write you letters. Continue to build relationships with them, nurture these relationships. And then at the end of the day, you want to make sure to make the ask. So you want to give them a heads up that you plan to apply to graduate school, and they should not be surprised if you ask them for a letter of rec, especially if they already know you and have been catching up with you and supporting you. And then the last thing I want to say is to make sure that once you get a yes from them, that you follow up with additional materials that they'll need to write the strong letter. Typically, when you ask for a letter of rec, professors will need a certain set of materials from you. They'll want to see at least one of your application essays, maybe both if you have drafts of them. At the very least, they want to see your statement of purpose. And it's okay if it's a draft. They just need something to work off of. They'll also want to see your resume or CV. They most likely will also want to see your transcript. And if you're submitting a writing sample, they may want your writing sample. Of course, you can always ask them if there's anything else that they need. And don't be afraid of asking for a letter of rec because you're afraid of having to submit these materials to them. Because just because you're asking for it doesn't mean you have to give them the materials right away. So let's say, for example, you're asking for a letter 3 months before a deadline and they say yes. Then you can follow up and let them know that you'll provide all the materials they need within a month before the deadline. And then you still give yourself time to draft, edit, revise these materials before you submit them to the recommenders. Okay, I think that's everything I want to say about letters of rec for now. Now I want to talk about funding because, oh my goodness, I have a lot of thoughts about graduate school admissions, especially grad school admissions in 2025 and moving forward. So one of the things that I'm noticing that happens to be a recession trend is that usually when we are going into a downward economy, more people will want to go to graduate school and will pursue more professional development opportunities or will want to continue their education because they're struggling to get a job. And so that is actually true this year because I've heard from some folks who work and also who talk to folks who work in graduate division that they're seeing a growing number of people accepting a graduate offer than in previous years. And that, to me, is very on trend with what I've noticed, not just now, but even in 2008, for instance. That was actually why I decided to go to graduate school, because I knew that it was going to be really hard for me to get a job right out of college. And it continues to be the case today, where I'm hearing from a lot of folks. This is all, of course, just what I hear. And it's not like I'm conducting a research project on this, but what I've noticed, that's all hearsay, but from my clients, from my colleagues in academia, and even my colleagues in industry, it's that a lot of folks are trying to up their professional development and even go back to school. And so all of this means that funding is a big question mark. Some programs, they are continuing to honor their promises of providing full funding packages for the people they admit into their PhD programs. Historically, even before going into a downward economy, it's always been the case that master's programs get very little to no funding, so that's not a surprise. But we're seeing also that there's a lot of question marks and instability around student loans, for instance. So whereas before, I'm not sure if at one point there were subsidize graduate loans, but nowadays you can't access, as far as I know, subsidized graduate loans. You can only access unsubsidized graduate school loans, which means that as soon as you take out the loan, the interest accrues and you have to pay that over time. Even if you're not paying during your program, you're still accruing that interest, which is only growing the amount that you have to pay once you're ready to pay your loan. And now we don't know if some of the other options that we had with federal loans are going to stay. We've had for a while the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program that would allow individuals who were in public roles to qualify to get their loans forgiven after 10 years of qualifying payments. Nowadays, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what the future of the PSLF program is anymore. We also don't know if there are going to be the same repayment options that we've had in the past, where you had different types of choices, including an income-based repayment option that has been helpful for us to not have this burden of a huge payment each month if that didn't reflect the salary of what we were making. All of this to say, I don't have answers about student loans, but I will say this, that there are still programs offering full funding, especially in PhD programs. There are a lot of people that are going to continue to fight to provide whatever funding they can provide. I have also heard on the other side of things that there are folks who are getting graduate program offers with no funding because previously those slots were funded by federal grants. So that's the other question mark, is what's going to happen to federal grants. We're seeing a lot going on in terms of what's happening with the Department of Education. And so this makes it so that it's harder to tell where you can get your funding from. Are you going to be able to get funding externally from big national foundations? Are you going to be able to get your funding internally from your department? It's unclear. But you know what? Even before, when you were applying to a graduate program, there was never any certainty of what you would get. So students would tell me, oh, I only want to apply to programs where I know for sure I'm going to get full funding. And I would say, good luck with that, because there is no such thing as knowing for sure which program is going to give you full funding. Even if they say that, there's no guarantee until you have the offer on hand. And so a lot of times you're just applying, hoping and praying for a good offer, and you only know when you have the offer made available to you. So in this case, again, there's a lot of big question marks. We don't know what's going to happen with funding, but just know that a lot of the options that have been available will probably continue to be available. And by that, I mean teaching assistantships, research assistantships, fellowship funding, and scholarships and grants. And if some of these options are reduced or there are fewer slots, what that means for you, especially if you're not in a PhD program, because usually PhD students get more funding than people in other programs. What that means is that you're going to need to get even more creative and make that your part-time job to consistently be applying for funding. I know it's frustrating, but it is part of the job of pursuing a graduate education to continuously be applying for opportunities. The last thing I want to say about funding is that if you're curious about more funding options and what you can do, I also have a separate blog post and a checklist for you that's all about 20 plus ways to fund your master's program. It's intended for master's students because, again, I keep saying this, in PhD programs, usually you have a higher chance of getting a fully funded offer, and that's not usually the case for master's programs. So that's why I wrote that blog post. So check it out. I'm also going to add it to the show notes for today. Now that I talked about funding, I want to talk about what to expect and maybe some potential challenges that might come up in graduate school. With graduate school, it's really hard for me at least, because I've been so far removed from graduate school. It's hard. It's going to be almost 10 years, y'all, that I finished my PhD. So I'm starting to feel old. But in any case, it's hard for me to think back, okay, what are the differences between undergrad and graduate school? But I will say this, there's a lot less hand holding in graduate school. And also, graduate school gets harder the longer you stay. Typically, in graduate programs, you will have some time that you're taking coursework, and then you will have some remaining time that you are writing a thesis or working on a dissertation. During coursework, you will get more support, of course, because there's structure, you have a syllabus to follow, you know what to expect when things are due. And so it's in some ways more straightforward, knowing what to do and when to do it. And that can be, for some, easier to follow and to meet the milestones. But then when you make the transition of finishing coursework and then you're studying for qualifying exams, and that can be a big hurdle. And then after that, you might have to write a proposal for your research, and that's another hurdle. Then after that, you're collecting data, you may be conducting interviews, whatever it is that you're doing, you're gathering your primary materials for what you're going to be analyzing, and then you're doing the writing process. There's a lot less hand-holding. There's a lot less structure. You might not have any firm timeline or any firm deadlines. In fact, recently I met with a student who told me that they have a set deadline for qualifying exams each semester. That if you're going to do it, you're going to do it at this deadline. Every single semester is the same deadline. And I thought, wow, that's so unusual, because usually it's up to the student and their advisor to find a date that works, and that can get delayed and delayed and delayed. And that's why people get stuck in what we call the ABD stage, or the all but dissertation stage, because they just don't have the structure, they don't have the accountability, they don't have firm deadlines, and they get stuck in limbo for many years. So that's what I want to make you aware of, that maybe your first year might be challenging because you're making this transition of, oh my gosh, I went from having to read and understand information to all of a sudden I'm having to think critically about it and be a contributing member of the conversation, as if I myself are creating knowledge as well, because you are. That's essentially what you're doing in a graduate program. That transition can be hard, but then once you get into the flow of coursework and you finally start to get the hang of it, then you're done with coursework and then you have another milestone to reach. So please know there's major milestones. Timelines can often be fuzzy. So that's why I help a lot of my clients with creating timelines for themselves, updating them, coming up with their own structure, their own routine, so that they can keep making progress, because if they don't do it for themselves, no one else is going to do it for them. And then, of course, there's always the expectations of you're reading a lot, you're writing a lot, and it's a heavy time commitment compared to undergrad. So keep that in mind. The other thing, too, is that you're expected to be a lot more independent in graduate school. Your relationship with professors shifts in that you're in this awkward stage where you're considered a professional, but you're still technically a student. You might be a TA, and so you might be lecturing, grading materials. But again, some professors might still be treating you like a student. Some professors might be treating you like a colleague. So it feels like you're in this in-between space that can be hard. It can be hard to take yourself seriously as a professional because you don't have the PhD yet. But then you know you're much more advanced than an undergrad, so you can't even relate to the undergrads either. So just know that that feeling of feeling a little bit in between or like you don't belong is really common in graduate school. One thing you can do now in terms of preparing for graduate school is to talk to more graduate students, also to figure out what works best for you in terms of your executive functioning skills, figure out what are your learning styles, figure out how you best like to manage your time, figure out what you want to prioritize in graduate school, what are your non-negotiables in terms of the things you want to make time for, even when your deadlines are coming up and you feel like you have no time. What are the things you still want to prioritize so that your life doesn't just become work? And then, of course, make sure you have a plan for taking care of yourself, a plan for taking care of your mental health, a plan for taking care of your physical health, because again, it's really easy to get caught up in the workload and then let everything else fall off. And you want to make sure that you are okay in graduate school as well. The other thing is I'm going to say are the things that I say a lot in my podcast and also in my workshops. And it's about making sure that you build up your support system, that you build community wherever you go to graduate school. Make sure that you continuously network, you continuously meet new professors, that you nurture relationships with other professionals, that you are thinking through how this is all going to translate to a career one day so that you don't feel stuck. I have another person that I work with who one of the things that she's going to be doing is every time she has a break in her writing, because there are times that she has to send her writing to her advisor and the advisor doesn't get back to her right away. So she has a lull period or a downward period where she still can get work done, but it's not related to her dissertation. So what she's going to be doing in that time period is this professional development stuff of learning new skills, of networking, of talking to professionals in different industries so that she knows that no matter what, by the time she graduates, she's going to have different career options. And so I want to remind you about that no matter what program you're part of, you have the power and the agency to take control over what you're learning, what skills you're acquiring, who you're building relationships with, so that once you're done with the program, you don't feel like you've lost everything. You have come out of it with the knowledge, with the skills, and with the network to help you get to the next step in your career. All right, that's this episode. It is pretty jam-packed, although it's only a fraction of what I share in my workshops. Usually my workshops are about 90 minutes. If you want to hear more from me on this topic, let me know. I am considering doing a series of blog posts, so more blog posts on these topics. So I want to know which ones are the topics that are most interesting to you. And then, of course, if you want to hire me or reach out to someone who can hire me for a grad school admissions workshop, please, please, please reach out. And my one-on-one consulting packages are also available if you need that hands-on support. All right, y'all, that's it for this episode. And as always, I will talk to you all next time. Thanks so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, here are 3 ways you can support the show. The first is to make sure you're subscribed and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. The second way is to get your copy of my free resource kit linked in my show notes. This kit includes tools, worksheets, and podcast playlists on all things grad school, productivity, and personal development. The third way to support my show is to follow me on social media. You can find me on Instagram with the handle @Grad School Femtoring and on LinkedIn by searching my name. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.